This episode of the podcast is being sponsored by my friends over at Real Mushrooms, realmushrooms.com, my friends Jeff and Sky Chilton. I had Jeff on the podcast. He's a really fascinating guy. I was really happy when they offered to be a sponsor. They sell medicinal mushrooms, things like reishi, chaga, cordyceps, turkey tail. I think many people are now familiar with the amazing medicinal qualities of mushrooms. They sell an amazing product. It's 100% organic. It's the actual mushroom, which is unlike a lot of companies that are either not organic, they don't actually use the mushroom, they can have fillers, they're potentially using the mycelium on grain, and that's in the final product. So really high quality product. It's the only product I use. I think they're just doing amazing work. As listeners of the podcast, you can receive 25% off of your first order if you use the discount code UNIVERSE at checkout, and I think you'll be really, really happy with their products. On this episode of the podcast, I sat down with Dr. Aaron Hartman. Dr. Hartman is a very interesting guy. He's a medical doctor, a functional medical practitioner. He has a number of different titles. I think he's doing really good work. We sat down and spoke about his background, what brought him initially to medicine, his path of really beginning to focus more on the art of functional medicine that was really spawned by the health of one of his children and helping his daughter to overcome her diagnosis. And then really his own journey of learning the art of medicine. We spoke about diagnosis, about chronic health conditions, about diet, about environmental toxins, physical ailments, mental, and even the role of spirit in health. It was a really interesting conversation. Again, I think he's doing very good work. He's very grounded and I think just very, very well-versed and really looking at medicine in a holistic and integrative way. So it was really a pleasure to have him come on and share. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help. We make these shows and really rely on people being able to support us, and Patreon is a really amazing platform to be able to do that. I really like the idea of that platform because it's based on reciprocity. So if you're feeling like you're gaining something from this podcast, that's a really beautiful way to give back. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. As always, thank you very much to the people supporting that way. And if you are able to, thank you in advance. And if not, always just helping with the algorithms is a really big help to get this show out to a bigger audience. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video. And if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review is a really big help. Also, I have my calendar out for my 2026 schedule. We'll be in Peru, we'll be in Ireland, we're doing some remote dietas. We also hope to have a few more to come. So if you'd like to work with me, you can check out my website at nicotianarustica.org, and there'll be a link to that in the show notes. So I think that's it for the intro, and without further ado, here is my conversation with Dr. Hartman.
Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out of the maze today. Running out from the maze, running out from the maze, running out from the maze today. I'm running out from the maze, running out from the maze, run out of the maze today.
Well, Dr. Hartman, thank you so much for coming on. We were chatting a little bit before we started, and you're coming from Virginia. I'm from Virginia, so it was kind of an interesting serendipity there. I think you're doing some really interesting work, bringing together different kind of integrative approaches of medicine, and that's a lot of what this podcast focuses on. So perhaps some of the audience has heard of you. I would imagine some haven't as well. So always to start, and I know it's quite a big question, but could you just give the audience a bit about your background, who you are, what you do, and kind of your life trajectory that landed you to where you are now?
That's fair enough. I mean, I started trajectory very typical, standard, traditional biology degree undergrad. graduated summa cum laude, went to the Medical College of Virginia, got my medical degree, was in the military, started an academic research company, and was a principal investigator for over 70 trials. Currently, I'm an assistant clinical professor of medicine at the Medical College of Virginia. So just very typical standard, like, doing the routine kind of stuff. Working hard, trying to learn new things. One of my mantras was every year to learn a new procedure, a new thing. And so doing the regular kind of thing you wouldn't expect anything outstanding to come out of. But the way I kind of got off the beaten path was when we adopted our daughter, Anna. My wife is a pediatric occupational therapist. And part of it is really interesting when I first met her. Part of what occupational therapists do is they treat, strangely enough, in the occupational therapy world, they treat each person as an individual, and they figure out, you have to figure out what's best for them. And she worked with kids with special needs who all had these rare, weird diagnoses. Some of my I'd never even heard of before, and so everyone needed their own unique thing. And so Anna, who's our daughter, when she got out of the hospital when she was 6 weeks old, became one of her patients. Part of Anna's story is that her birth mother used crystal meth the entire pregnancy. Anna had a stroke before she was born functionally blind. And so when my wife started being her therapist, working on small stuff with her, the prognosis was she'd never walk, talk, or crawl. So fast forward, 12 months, she's 12, 13 months old, and her foster home's closing down. My wife says, hey, would you consider bringing this little girl into our home, being foster parents, and maybe even adopting her? And we talked about this when we dated, and we, at that point in time, were married for maybe 2 years. And I'm like, sure. And it's kind of funny because, it's kind of funny things you say. I don't know if, Jason, you ever say things and you're like, I can't believe I said that, or you kind of laugh about it. But I remember saying, we can always give her back, right? And my wife knew I'd eventually fall in love with my daughter. So we brought her into the house. But the first thing with her, and with all kids with special needs, is failure to thrive, getting adequate nutrition. And so the standard of care is, give kids formula, put lots of high carb calorie stuff in. We were not doing that. We knew she needed decent nutrition. And so doing our best, went back to the GI doctor evaluation, and she was failure to thrive. And so the next step is to do a surgical procedure, put a feeding tube into her stomach, and then she can pour lots and lots and lots of sugar water called formula into her belly. And we knew that was the wrong thing to do. Chewing and swallowing is part of developing your ability to talk. Crawling is a part of your developing your ability to walk. And it's hard to do with a feeding tube out of your belly. It's hard to do when you don't actually chew and swallow. And even though the system said she'd never do any of those things, we had higher expectations. And so we said, no, we're not going to do that. And we were reported to Child Protective Services for medical neglect because we refused to do what the doctor said. That was the first inflection point that kind of got me off the path. And what really got me down to the dark side, if you will, was 6 months later when my wife found a growth chart for kids with cerebral palsy. And Anna was right in the middle. She was normal for her diagnosis. And all of a sudden, it was like the experts don't know, the professionals don't know. Oh my gosh, what else do they not know? And all of a sudden, there was a burden on me. I have to figure this out. And that was the inch at Cape Canaveral that led to a mile at the moon that kind of got me down this pathway of getting up at 4 o'clock in the morning, researching, gene-based therapies, autism, environmental toxins. Like, how do you treat a kid with crystal meth exposure? Like, what do you do for that? And so hour upon hour every day. And so over the period of several years, I kind of put together an individualized plan for her, and she has thrived. She's turning 20, and she's actually going to be my first child who moves out of the home in April, in a couple months from now. So it's been a wild ride. And the thing about her journey is her journey has benefited thousands of patients through my practice changing, through me growing my practice, through what I do on social media. And she's kind of where it all started.
Yeah, that's an amazing story. Can you speak a bit more about that process of going to medical school? I mean, did you always know you wanted to be a doctor? What was kind of that process like for you? And kind of looking back, do you have any reflections on that? I mean, for the better, maybe, and for the worse as well.
I mean, I remember being, 4 years old, walking through Harrisonburg to the little park with my parents saying, I'm going to be a doctor when I grow up, And to be honest with you, the seeds of that were me going to our country doctor, family doctor outside of Harrisonburg with my mom. And he'd listen to her chest and ask her some questions and talk with her and give her some pills. And we'd give her a shot for penicillin for, actually, I got strep throat a couple times when I was a kid. And I was like, I can do that. I can like talk to people and listen to their chest. So I assumed it was that easy, right? And and just always wanted to do it. And so when I got into medical school, it was a different world. Medical school is weird because the joke is you're spoon fed with a dump truck. So they literally give you all you need to learn. It's like, you don't need to do anything. Here's your, we'd have cardiology, for example, is a 6-week course. The syllabus was 1,200 type pages, and in 6 weeks is basically a textbook, and you did that in 6 weeks. And it would take it. I spent 12 hours a day studying, learning that. And so you basically get mass amounts of information given to you because you're building your foundation. And it's one of those things where, do we talk about alternative stuff? No. Did we talk about nutrition? No. Did we talk about, kids with special needs? No. But they're building this really deep science-based foundation, which is great, which I don't regret that at all. The Medical College of Virginia, where I went at that point in time, was considered one of the 4 or 5 heaviest academic load schools on the East Coast as far as what they expected you to learn in those first 2 years. It built the foundation of everything I learned on top of that. But at the same time, when you go through that system and you're kind of just spoon-fed with a dump truck, it makes it hard. You get these blinders because after you read like dozens of textbooks and studied, literally at the end of my second year, I had a pile of 7,000 pages of notes that I'd memorized. It was the equivalent of 8.5 years of undergraduate education I'd done in 2 years. You develop a certain mindset that I kind of know it all. I'm a genius. I'm smart. I got this. And I literally remember telling my cousin I'd mastered medicine when I was finishing my residency, and he kind of nodded his head and kind of was like, whatever. It took another 10 years for me to realize that medicine is this infinitely huge thing that I'll never get to the bottom of it. So I enjoyed my education. I learned a lot, but it does kind of put blinders on you unless you're forced off the beaten path, which in my world, functional medicine world, typically people have a story that gets them off the beaten path.
And what was that transition for you of moving from your field to functional medicine? Is that something you went back to school for, or something you began to train yourself in? Or because I would imagine at that time functional medicine wasn't. I mean, it's a bit more in the common vernacular now, but I would imagine at that time very few people had even heard of that.
Yeah, back then it was just I've heard about autism. And I started studying it because I was like, there's a thing called translational medicine. And it's kind of like finding things that are close enough together and bridging the gap. And for me, I was like, okay, autism, that's a neurological issue. Kids happen earlier. There's some toxins or chemicals or whatever. So I started researching that and studying that and found an expert, Dr. Wool, who he was a pediatrician who specialized on autism, and just did his course, learned from him. And then that led to like, well, there's genes you can have. So then found a Dr. Yasko, who was a PhD, who had a kid with autism, had a child with autism, who developed a whole system of doing gene testing to find out what nutritional deficiencies you're prone to. So I did a couple of those things, which are each like 6-month stints of study. And then all of a sudden came across the American Board of the Institute for Functional Medicine, which has like a 2-year training course. So started doing that. But the goal was to find things to help Anna. So when I started that functional training, I learned about functional neurology. Dr. Datis Karazi and Brandon Brock started a whole thing called the Functional Neurology Institute. And so they would train practitioners, typically chiropractors, in functional neurology, which is basically looking at someone, the way they walk and talk, and figure out what parts of your brain aren't working, and then develop a treatment strategy for that. So I can't keep on going down these rabbit trails, learning the foundational stuff, which was through the Institute for Functional Medicine. And that was probably about 2 years to go through that, plus those other side trails. And then learned about chronic inflammatory response syndrome, which is mold-related illness. Went down that pathway and just kept on learning new things. Learned about lipid medicine, Dr. Patricia Kane, and how you can actually use fats to heal the brain. And so this whole process of me going down all these different pathways and eventually getting 3 board certifications was probably about 10 years of education and training and things. And it is a lot of work, but the thing about it is you have to pay for it yourself. Insurance doesn't reimburse for your second or your third board certification or your SEER certification or your peptide certification, right? They don't pay for that stuff. So I was actually, through my regular practice, subsidizing my education, and ended up spending several $100,000 outside of medical school, outside of regular school on my additional education, which is part of the reason why a lot of people don't do this, because it's a lot of time. It was 2 to 3 hours a day of study. It's expensive, and it did take me away from my family to a certain degree, but it also enabled me to care for my family and ultimately my patients as well.
So one thing I think often gets overlooked is the field or even the idea of diagnosis. I mean, I think we take for granted so much just of going to the doctor and they should know what the problem is, what the solution is. How does that look for you? I mean, what have you learned in that regard? When someone comes to you now, what is that process of diagnosis for you? What are you looking for? What are you looking for in the person? Are there physical things you're looking for, relational things you're looking for, history? Like, what does that process look like for you?
Actually, Jason, that's a great question that I think we're going to talk about a lot right now. No one's ever asked me that question, actually, in particular, because in traditional medicine, you're taught this buffet of like literally you learn tens of thousands of diagnoses. These are your heart diagnoses. These are your neurological ones. These are your gut ones. And so when someone comes in with a group of symptoms, you're like, okay, let me match these up. This sounds like, you've had a heart attack. This sounds like you have cancer. This sounds like hemophilia. This sounds like, whatever the diagnosis is. And then you start treating based on that diagnosis. So it's really this pattern matching, pattern recognition kind of diagnosing. But you have this wide field of symptoms, but you get a single diagnosis. And different patterns give you different diagnoses. So someone comes in with diabetes and gout and kidney stones and PCOS and sleep apnea, and they become 5 separate diagnoses. So each one has 5 separate treatment regimens, which could result in like a handful of pills or whatnot. Functional medicine. So I think with your looking at, this might resonate with your audience, different ways of diagnosing traditional Chinese medicine, Ayurvedic medicine, all these different practices based on people's observations create a way of looking at the world. And so what functional medicine did, and there's like many different experts in functional medicine who've created their own paradigms, and I've learned most of them, and kind of what I do is I take all these different paradigms and put them together. With functional medicine, you look at systems. So you look at like system 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Okay. One is your energy system. It's your thyroid, your adrenal gland, and your pancreas, which is insulin. System 2 is your gut, immune, brain. System 3 is your heart, cardiopulmonary nerve. So it's your heart, your lungs, and your nervous system. System 4 is your detox system, liver, lymph, kidney. And 5 are your sex hormones. And so in functional medicine, you start looking at people, okay, you have come in with this group of symptoms I just mentioned. That sounds like metabolic syndrome. Okay, that kind of fall in some system 1, some system 2, because there's a gut component and there's a insulin resistance component. And so when you learn functional medicine, you learn to look at things more like how does everything work together with everything else, and you look at things from a more holistic perspective, like the gut, immune, brain. So which is system 2. So the gut is where 75% of all your neurotransmitters are made. 90% of serotonin comes from your gut. You have as many neurons in your gut as you do your spinal cord. Your gut connects to your heart, connects to your brain. So we now know that Alzheimer's and Parkinson's start in your gut 20 years before diagnosis. So all of a sudden, in the functional medicine paradigm, we're starting to see connections, and we group things together that work together. But one of the things I learned, there's other people who've done this as well. Dr. Horowitz is one who created his own functional medicine paradigm, but looking at from Lyme disease perspective. So he has 16 different systems he looks at, including detoxification, chronic infections. So what I started doing is learning these different systems, and I've kind of created my own thing where I put them all together. In the I don't know if you've heard of mast cell activation syndrome, if that sounds familiar at all, or how about autoimmune issues, right? There's another system that looks at this thing called the pentad super syndrome, which is 5 things that come together: autoimmune issues, gut issues, hypermobility, dysautonomia, and then mast cell. And so when you see people with chronic fatigue and fibro and Lyme and brain fog and post-concussive, they actually tend to fit in this system. And what I've also started learning is like in the traditional Chinese medicine world, the Ayurvedic medicine world, they've, the doshas, these energy points, right, in your body. Well, actually, those correlate with ganglia or conglomerations of nerves. So how do I make a diagnosis? What I do is I kind of have my own system where I take my traditional medical system. Let's give you these diagnoses, boom, boom, boom. Whatever it is, your chronic fatigue, fibro, chronic Lyme, mold, You have some neurological issues, neuropathy, diabetes, weight, hormone issues. And I kind of get those diagnoses. And I look at what systems are being involved based on your story. Okay. Then I look at some energetic stuff. And then there's this and this is all based on the foundation of the foundational functional medicine was diet, exercise, sleep, and then meaning and purpose. So it's interesting how just having a meaning and purpose in life affects your neurology. So to answer your question, how to make a diagnosis, I kind of use all these systems and try to put a traditional model together with a functional integrative model, and then use outside, whether it's ancient wisdom or newer stuff we're learning, and try to put together, like, for the person in front of me, and figure out an individualized plan for them. And this is exactly what I did for my daughter. I'm still doing for my daughter now, 19 years later.
You mentioned really interesting that one of the things that inspired you to be a doctor was in Harrisonburg or wherever you said this idea of seeing a doctor when you were a kid. And I think at that time, like my great grandfather was an osteopath and a general practitioner. He had a small clinic in Lynchburg, and there was something very familiar. I mean, he would also travel, he would do house calls. It was very much like a family operation. I mean, his name was even Doc because people just called him Doc. And, it was a fairly small town back then. A lot of medicine really seems to have moved away from that. I mean, people do have, I think, a relationship with their perhaps general practitioner, but it does seem to move in a more specialized direction and being referred to different specialists. That's one of the things I think I heard you mention, which maybe you found beneficial about functional medicine, was this idea of looking at the person in the entirety. And it's often very difficult if you only have one specialty and you're looking through one particular lens to maybe understand all of the other things and how they can interrelate with one another. Can you speak a bit about that, about maybe how your practice and maybe functional medicine in general looks at the whole person rather than necessarily trying to specialize in one particular field?
I mean, my training is as a primary care family practitioner. So I actually worked at a mission hospital in Ecuador and in Honduras, and I've worked in Belize and Mexico and just a bunch of different places. And I want to be able to do everything. I want to be able to help people wherever they're at. And so functional medicine just perfectly aligns with my innate desire to be able to kind of help people wherever they're coming from. And, what the idea is that you have to learn everything about the person, like where you grew up. Did you grow up in Annapolis? Did you grow up in the poultry capital of the world, which is what Harrisonburg was when I was a kid? Or did you grow up around the Great Lakes? Like, all those things will affect environmental toxin exposures. If you're from the Midwest, for example, you're more likely to have iodine deficiency and certain nutrient deficiencies. And so learning, like, your past, like your family, does cancer run your family? Does heart disease run your family, right? Well, the old thinking, the reductionist thinking, the thinking that you're nothing more than your genes, right? Used to be it's all genetic. Well, now we know that 90% of cancer is environmental. It's not genetic. Most heart disease, 80% of heart disease. This is an interesting number. 80% of heart disease and 70% of most cancers can be prevented by diet and lifestyle alone. So all of a sudden, these basic things can eliminate the number one and the number two killer in our country. And so how do I apply that to you? I have to know where you grew up. Did you have dental problems when you were a kid? How many cavities did you have? Did you have silver fillings put in? I mean, your issues in adulthood might be related to an infected root canal that you had put in 20 years ago. And what was your childhood like? Did you have trauma in childhood? Were you not safe in childhood? Did you have a stable childhood? Like, all these things will affect your nervous system, which is the thing that connects everything else, and how it affects how your body works, your physiology. And then you kind of learn that. Then you get to you're here right now with these symptoms. How does that past play into the present? How's your current environment affecting your present? Did you go hiking in the Appalachian Trail, 8 years ago, get a tick bite, ignore it, and now you got COVID, okay? And you have all these weird symptoms. You got Lyme reactivated. So all of a sudden, in my world, it's like I'm like an Uber generalist. I'm an Uber family practice doc. I'm an Uber individual doc, where you have to figure out a plan for the person based on their individual needs. And even like the diet you grew up eating, the diet you have now, it's, I think something like 25 or 30% of Americans have a C15 deficiency, which is an essential fatty acid. It's an essential saturated fatty acid induced by nutritional things, right? And so all of a sudden, knowing all these things helps me figure out what's where's your body working today, and what your goals are. So Jason, if your goal is, hey, I'm healthy, I'm young, I want to live to be 90, keep my mind, keep my heart, I want to age well, then all of a sudden it's like, okay, cool, like with your goals and with this history, let's do some testing and figure out a plan for you. And so what I do is I look at everything, which is you can't do that in one office visit. You can't do that in a 15-minute in and out, 10-minute in and out. My intake is about 2.5 hours. And the first follow-up after that's an hour and 15 minutes. So this kind of deep medicine requires actually a deep relationship with your patients, that they'll share things with you they won't share with other people, tell you stories they haven't told other people. And sometimes it takes years for stuff to even come out. Stories, events that might be affecting someone's health or blocking them from healing. So it's really enjoyable. It's like I'm a sleuth trying to figure things out. But that's kind of how I approach people. And many times the healing journey is literally learning as you go along.
Yeah, I mean that's I think that's an amazing way to work. When you're saying like that initial intake, it can take 2.5 hours. Is that in person, or are you doing forms beforehand? Are you talking to that person for that entire time?
Typically, the person spends several hours filling out paperwork that I review beforehand, depending on what I'm doing or with them at the time, and then kind of fill in the gaps. Like because you'll spend 4 hours filling all this, 20 pages of documents out, which is a little bit of a burden. But my philosophy is, if you can't, give that time to give me information, you're probably not going to commit to making lifestyle changes. But also, I want as much information as I can get in order to give you the best care available. And so I collect that information. And then as I'm talking with the person, I kind of review it. I start thinking. So what I do is I think while I'm talking to the person, I start outlining what system might be involved or not involved, what nutritional deficiency may not be involved. Do you have a diagnosis that I need to take into account for this, a conventional diagnosis? And then I put a basic plan out, and then I fill in the gaps with labs. And we do, 700 or 800 different biomarkers. It's like 40 vials of blood. And that gives me data points, to fill in the gaps. And part of it's a nutritional analysis. One thing I haven't mentioned yet is like nutrient deficiencies. Like we all have some kind of nutrient deficiency in something somewhere, and so finding those, just filling those gaps many times gets people's bodies self-healing and self-repairing. Then I follow back up with them in the review, the hour and 15 minute. I take what I learned on the intake, what I learned from the labs, and then I rethink, resynthesize for the third time. And that's our plan. We go forward. And the plan many times changes, takes detours. It also depends on the person's goals, because people's goals change as they feel better, as they get back their health, as their mind clears. All of a sudden their goals change. And so then that can many times lead us down other paths as well.
You mentioned this idea of reductionist thinking, and even when I was very young, I was quite active and sporty, and I just remember, also learning in school that idea that it was when the genome had been mapped, and there was all this emphasis that everything was genes, and even as a young child, that seemed quite crazy to me, because it completely took away human volition. And I mean, even practicing sports, I mean, I could say as a kid, like, there's a big difference in who shows up. I mean, are you showing up 5 days a week, or are you showing up 1 day a week? I mean, that's going to have a huge difference. And it doesn't matter what your genes are. Did you show up 5 times, or did you show up 1 time? Part of that reductionist way of thinking is generally looking at everything very much on the physical level. And one of the interesting things that I think you mentioned, which I think is becoming maybe more accepted in the medical world, is this idea behind a mind-body connection, this idea of the psychology of someone, the life's purpose, as you mentioned, traumatic events that potentially could have happened in one's childhood. Obviously, there's physical trauma that could happen, but probably even more so emotional trauma. How do you, and this may be a big question, but how do you balance that more mental, emotional, psychological state when someone is coming to you versus the physical? Because even very often we tend to isolate these two fields. Like we would label one as psychology, one is maybe more medicine. But I think, again, I mean, I think for you it's quite obvious, but I think even for more people in both fields, there obviously is an interrelation between those two. How do you navigate those two fields?
I mean, I think, to the point you start with, think this idea of what's your worldview? How do you look at the world around you? How do you look at facts? There are no raw facts. All facts have to be interpreted. All data has to be interpreted. So how do you interpret that? And so for 100 years, we had a very reductionist Darwinian viewpoint. And when we had the gene theory pop up, it fit perfectly into that. You are nothing more than a fancy machine. You're a bunch of cogs in the wheel. And if we understand the cogs, the genes, we can figure out all these cures. We can cure all kinds of stuff. And the result of 100 years of thinking that way and 70 years post genes is we haven't really done a whole lot with that. We're realizing that humans are infinitely complex. You can't make some of this stuff up. The Earth's electromagnetic fields, the Schumann force, and there's flux literally affect your nervous system. Things like lunar cycles, things like solar flares. We've seen how that interacts with people's psychological health, the atmospheric pressure. There's so many environmental things that affect us. So the point is that we are infinitely complex in this infinitely complex world. And if you have a very reductionistic view, that's great for, like, you have a gallbladder issue, you have a heart issue, you have a brain tumor. We need to use this super deep expertise to figure that out. But what happens is, in the newer complex world with chronic health issues, you have to have a broader view. And to your point with the mind-body connection, that's something we're just now starting to understand. Many scientists still think the mind is an epiphenomena of the brain. Like, your mind is nothing more than all the neurons firing at a certain time. But if you look at some of the literature, it's like we can't explain the mind solely based on physical phenomena. So, not to get into a conversation about that, but how do you meet someone with health issues and talk about the mind-body connection? And ultimately what I do is I meet people where they're at. And many times people come to see me and they're like, I'm not into woo-woo, crazy mind-body stuff. I've got chronic Lyme disease. I've got post-concussive illness. I've got an autoimmune. I've got Hashimoto's. I've whatever. I want you to treat that. I want you to be reductionistic for that. I'm like, okay, cool. And what I do is I try to introduce them to bigger and bigger concepts. And what tends to happen is people start, because people will improve you if you fix the nutritional deficiencies, change their diet, give them appropriate supplementation, use anti-inflammatories, just do some of the basic stuff. People's bodies will do what they're made to do, which is self-heal and self-repair. I mean, that's kind of intuitive. But if there's this mind-body part, which there typically is, you get to a point where your body's kind of stuck. And I feel like, for me, sometimes it's a couple of year process where people get to the point where, like, okay, like, I'm 40% better. What else could it be? Have I missed something? Have I missed the other tick-borne illness? Do labs check. And sometimes it's a couple of year process before we get to the point. I think this is deep-seated in your mind. I think this is a trauma, either a big T trauma, a little T trauma. Big T trauma are the ones that we recognize, PTSD, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, major adverse childhood events. But then there's the little T trauma. Like, if you're a mom of kids with special needs, the chronic stress that your kid might die, that your kid almost did die, that can cause a medical trauma on your brain. And all of a sudden your nervous system gets wired for fight or flight. And so for me, many times it's just a journey with the patient, meeting them where they're at, and doing interventions when they're ready for them. Because many people aren't ready for that. I have patients who come to me literally like, I don't want to talk about my past. I only want you to treat this problem. And you start talking to them you start in intake and start asking questions, and all of a sudden they're being triggered. And I know, whoa, your trauma, your history, your mind is a big part of your health issues, but you're not ready to deal with it. So we put it over here. Let's deal with some other body somatic stuff. But you got to meet people where they're at. And some people are there, from the very first get-go. And some people, it's a process until they're ready to actually realize, okay, I think this is from this life event, that happened to me, from my mom, my dad. One of the things I've learned from patients is having a narcissistic family member, a narcissistic spouse, brother, sister, being in an environment where you don't feel safe, where you feel that you're on the edge of a precipice, where if you do the wrong thing, someone going from, oh, you're amazing, Jason, I love you, you're awesome, to like, I can't believe, like that small precipice in that environment, their nervous system doesn't feel safe, and they grow up to be adults with chronic health issues. And so you have to meet people where they're at, but also realize that the mind-body connection is real. Man's Search for Meaning. That was a great book, but it was really interesting how having a reason for meaning literally can be the difference between surviving a concentration camp or not. Doesn't matter your socioeconomic status, doesn't matter your wealth, it doesn't matter if you're liked or not liked in the camp. Literally, if you have a reason to survive, that is the singular thing that determines your likelihood of living or not in the worst situations in modern history. So the mind-body connections are real. It's just meeting people where they're at.
One of the things you mentioned a few times is this idea of autoimmune conditions, things like Hashimoto and Lyme, and that's another thing that I think even 10 years ago, certainly 20, 30 years ago, I mean, there was even a view that these were just things that were made up, that were completely of the mind, that there was potentially not even a physical basis for them. I think there's really been a huge switch to that. I mean, even something like Lyme's disease or Hashimoto, I mean, that's very much part of the common vernacular now. People are aware of the thyroid. People are aware of certain autoimmune conditions. I mean, I know many people who have been diagnosed with Lyme. What is, and I know that, that's something you work with. What is your sense of that? Is that something that's just was not diagnosed properly and it existed? Has there been a significant increase in the case numbers of that? Like, what do you think is going on with this better understanding or this increase of diagnosis in autoimmune conditions?
Okay, so is this an autoimmune condition question, or is it a Lyme question, or you want me to answer?
Well, just I guess in general, yeah. Maybe we'll get to Lyme specifically, but
Okay.
just maybe in general, autoimmune
I
conditions.
mean, we've known about autoimmune conditions for at least over 100 years. There's an autoimmune condition. It was like auto what was it? It was horrificus. It was something like it was like basically an autoimmune condition where your body was eating itself, which was probably lupus back in the late 1800s. We've known about these situations for quite some time, but they were rare. It didn't happen that often. It was like an oddity that you'd learn about in medical school or hear about somewhere. Now, like 1 in 12 Americans will have a positive auto antibody for something. If you put autoimmune conditions as together, right now there's over 120. They are the most common health issue in our country right now if you put them all together. So it's one of those things where, why is it more common now? And in order to have an autoimmune condition, you have to have 4 things. You have to have a genetic predisposition, which I don't really address because I can't fix that. And I don't think it's a major thing. You have to have a chronic infection of some sort. And this is where you get into Epstein-Barr and Lyme and dental infections and gut issues. A triggering event could be concussion, could be COVID, could be a life stressor, divorce, could be living in a moldy house. And you have to have leaky gut or increased gastrointestinal permeability. So understanding that, all of a sudden we have a paradigm to understand autoimmune conditions. But one of the biggest triggers, one of the reasons why we're seeing more and more autoimmune conditions, which are basically what it is your immune system is supposed to recognize yourself. 99% of what your immune system is supposed to do is ignore yourself. Eat your food, drink your water, breathe your air, and whatever you're exposed to, your immune system is supposed to be ignore. Ooh, it's pneumonia, fight, right? It's flu, fight. But we're supposed to ignore the vast majority of stuff. And what happens is our immune systems become dysregulated. And a big factor in that is toxins and chemicals. You get these toxins will actually adhere to our cell walls and membranes, to foods we eat, and actually change the shape or conformation and say look different to our immune system. And repetitive exposure over time can actually induce autoimmune conditions. We actually create in research labs with animals, we'll take animals and use chemicals to create acute autoimmune problems in them and then see what drugs we can use to treat that. So, autoimmune diseases are not new. They've been around for ever. But the frequency with which we see them now is like escalating, just like cancer is escalating, just like heart disease is escalating, just like Lyme disease is escalating. So I think the better question is not, are we better at diagnosing these things, which is the way academics blow this off. Oh, we're just better at diagnosing, Hashimoto's or whatever than we were, 50 years ago. I'm like, well, we've known about cancer and there's a lot of things. We know about tuberculosis as long as there's been history. We've known about diabetes as long as there's been history. These are not things we didn't know about thousands of years ago. We might be able to diagnose them earlier in the process, but they're not new per se. But what's new is, for example, in 1900, the incidence of cancer in our country was 1 in 100. In 1990, it was 1 in 3. Now 1 in 2 people will get cancer in their lifetime. That's something that we can't really say, oh, we're just better at diagnosing it. I mean, dying from cancer is pretty obvious. It's called an autopsy. We've done those for hundreds of years. So there's definitely something going on that's making these things more common.
And You mentioned environmental toxins. That's one of the factors. Would you label that as the primary, or what else do you think is contributing to that?
I Yes, no, and maybe. So, yes, toxins are a big player. Yes, there's over 80,000 chemicals in our environment right now. I think maybe 2,000 have been studied and evaluated by the EPA. So the vast majority, we have no idea if they're healthy or not. So yes, that's going on. Heavy metal exposure, yes, that's going on. But there's also a dietary component to this. Eating, if you get appropriate nutrition, vitamin C, for example, is a natural abater. Vitamin E are abaters. Omega-3s are abaters for toxin exposure. We actually have literature on if someone gets a toxin exposure, we can use high doses of vitamin C, for example, to block the killing effect of toxins. So all of a sudden now our food system is messed up, nutrient deficiencies related to processed foods, and a lot of these chemicals. This is where it gets tricky. In our food system, which is largely laden with genetically modified foods, they have lots of Roundup and glyphosate in it. Corn, soy, wheat, which feeds the cows, chickens, pigs, which we eat. That accounts for like probably 89% of all the stuff we eat is those three things going into animals. And all of a sudden, we're getting lots of Roundup, glyphosate, petroleum distillate exposure in our food, right? So I think it's, yes, toxins and chemicals, yes, food, but they are very, very, very closely linked. So I don't think it's like just because my dad grew up on our farm. They used arsenic in the chicken feed. He used DDT as a spray, and he was in West Virginia to spray for bugs in the house. So these chemicals have been around for a long time, but it wasn't actually in the food system to the level it's at now. So I feel like it's both the degradation of our food system, introduction of chemicals into our food system and the environment, and then back to the whole mind-body thing. Stress is a big factor as far as that's as well. We could talk about blue zones, if you want. That's an interesting concept about how there's places in the world where people live longer than anywhere else, and they don't have access to all the modern conveniences, yet they live longer.
Can you speak a bit more about the environmental toxins? I mean, I think people are familiar with that to some degree, but I think there's still a lack of maybe awareness about just the profundity of and the amount of chemicals that are in pretty much all aspects of our lives now.
I mean, there's a thing called the HRCQ that they evaluate toxins in the environment, and the number one environmental toxin they're worried about is arsenic. So you're like, well, arsenic? Well, I never heard that before. Well, we used to use mercurial arsenates and arsenic derivatives for antifungals for killing stuff. It was literally till 2012, actually, the major chicken poultry manufacturers in our country voluntarily removed arsenic from chicken feed. So until 2012, it was a common ingredient in chicken feed to give them a low-grade gastritis. They'd eat more, they get fatter quicker. We routinely put these things in the environment, cleaning sprays. How do you clean your house? People come in your home and basically use these chemicals and toxins to kill bacteria. And a lot of these are petroleum-based chemicals, where petroleum-based chemicals actually are fat-soluble and actually can penetrate our bodies really easily and can actually infect our cells. And so all of a sudden you think about cleaning chemicals, you think about things added to food, the air we breathe. There's a thing called PM2.5. NOAA, which is a national ocean, I forget what NOAA stands for, NOAH, the people who track storms and hurricanes and stuff like that. They look at air quality, and you can look at PM2.5, which directly correlates with heart disease, cardiovascular disease in the area. When the levels spike, you'll see more heart attacks in the area. The biggest source for PM2.5 in the air is actually diesel exhaust, which is in any big major city. And so all of a sudden you have all these sources for chemicals that we didn't have hundreds of years ago. And to the point, I don't know if people still learn about this in school. I remember when I was in elementary school learning about the Industrial Revolution in Europe in the mid-1800s. And you had the cities were all black, the smog. I don't know if you saw those pictures in school. And there was that moth that was the white moth in England. The trees were so black with soot that the moth would get on the trees and the birds would see them and eat the moth, right? I don't know if that sounds familiar to you at all. I feel like it's stuff I learned in elementary school. But what happened in the 1800s, all of a sudden, hay fever became epidemic throughout Europe. Before that, people might get lung issues if you're a wool keeper's lung because all the wool, or a miner's lung or a farmer's lung. It was certain jobs got lots of exposure to particulates, and so you notice that job got an issue. It wasn't until the Industrial Revolution that we saw hay fever in the entire in the whole people groups and throughout the whole Europe. And that was the first big environmental exposure where you could correlate burning carbon-based fuels and lung disease and other things. And so this is a problem we've had since the Industrial Revolution. It's only gotten worse with the introduction of petroleum-based chemicals in our food system. But it's pretty ubiquitous. Tell someone to start eating real food. That's where my patients stumble. They struggle so much. Okay, real food. What do you mean? It's not processed, no chemicals, no dyes, real food. Okay, all of a sudden, you go to the grocery store, right? Everything in the middle you can't eat. In the box, it's you're being delegated to the outside, which is your produce section, your dairy section, and then your meat section. Everything else literally is processed in your grocery store. And even those outer sections, if you start looking at them, you'll see your salmon, for example. Did you know that your farm salmon is dyed orange? Because farm salmon is not naturally orange, right? So all of a sudden, even those sections, you're getting chemicals in our food.
We spoke a little bit about Lyme, and I know that's something you've worked with as well. That also seems to be something that's really taken a huge spike. I mean, I remember as a kid growing up in the East Coast, you never heard of anyone with Lyme, and then it started to trickle in, and now it seems like a relatively common phenomena. Do you think that's a kind of a similar trajectory of what you were speaking about with the environmental toxins, the food toxicity, or do you think there's something specific that's affecting that? And maybe an add-on to that. I mean, do you have any thoughts of the origin? I mean, I know it's kind of a controversial subject, but a lot of people have maybe similar to coronavirus or something, but that there could be some man component to that, or do you think it's something just completely natural that the terrain is now allowing that to really?
Yeah, I think it's more of a terrain issue personally. Coronavirus, within 3 months, we kind of knew it was kind of fishy. And then within 6 months, we had pretty clear data that it was engineered. It just the news media didn't allow that narrative to get out. So it took 3 years before it became well accepted. But we figured it out pretty fast. The whole, Lyme being, and I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying I've not read anything that's in my literature, in my studies, with all the stuff I've done. I've never actually come across any lecturer, any expert. I've done all the ILAD stuff, which is the International Lyme Associated Disease Training. I've not come across that in that environment. So I'm not going to speak to that because I've never actually read any research on it in all the reading I've done, which I've done a lot of reading. But I think the first question you have to ask yourself is, how long has Lyme been around? And the answer is, we first found Lyme. We have data that was around 5000 BC. Okay, that we actually I forget what year it was. We found this frozen. It was in the Swiss Alps, I believe. We found this frozen Iceman. It was nice frozen in the whatever the ice shelf was. Dug him out, did a DNA analysis, and found the DNA for Borrelia in his blood or in his body, right? So we know this guy 7,000 years ago actually had Borrelia in his body. So it's been around for 7,000 years. So the question is, why has it blown up in the last little bit? And I think that comes back to some of the environmental toxin chemical stuff. With Lyme blowing up, you'll see, some people say it's related to glyphosate or Roundup exposure. Some of the outbreak areas you've had across the country correlated with local spraying with Roundup in the areas, right? Or chemicals. It's kind of hard to pick one thing. I think the environment in general has gotten worse and is affecting our immune system so that these non-pathogenic things that we routinely get exposed to now are becoming pathogenic or disease causing. Things like Epstein-Barr. I mean, everybody gets Epstein-Barr. Everybody gets herpes. Everybody gets most people get exposed to HPV. The average American has 10 viruses in their body at any given point in time, right? So there you have over 100 trillion bacteria in and on your body, and over 100 trillion, so take that and multiply by 10 million, viruses in our body. Our body is this weird ecosystem that has a bacterial, virus, and a fungal component. We're actually made to live with these. Why now are we breaking that? Is that breaking down and we're not able to live with our gut bacteria, our skin bacteria, Lyme? And I think it's a big environmental toxin component and the nutritional component as well. I don't want to part of the nutritional component, if you get a clean diet, adequate vitamin D, adequate B vitamins, your immune system is going to be able to handle a lot of these things better. But we have all these nutrient deficiencies on top of toxins and chemicals, on top of infections. It's just a bad milieu for all these things. When I see people with chronic Lyme disease, we'll do IV vitamin C, we'll do high doses of vitamin D, we'll do a bunch of herbal things to boost their immune systems to help clear out Lyme from their bodies. So, and then going off from there, I've learned a lot from my patients that are vets, and where I live in Chesterfield County, about a quarter of all dogs have Lyme. If they do blood testing, but have no symptoms. That's pretty common. So the question becomes, with Lyme, I think Lyme is more like Epstein-Barr, more like herpes. It's a intercellular parasite organism that if your immune system is healthy and safe, you put it away and doesn't bother you. But if you get cancer, you get a concussion, you get COVID, it reactivates just like Epstein-Barr, just like herpes, and becomes an issue. And what can make that more likely is environmental toxins, chemicals, stress, poor sleep, moldy home, living in a moldy house, local environmental toxin exposure. All these things add up. I don't think it's just one thing. I think it's this big soup of things. And that's where the personalized medicine perspective comes into play. Finding out for the person, what is your toxic soup? What led to you with your Lyme disease diagnosis? Give you a story. One of my patients, and I think you can appreciate this, from the Blue Ridge Parkway, went to UVA for college, played soccer at UVA actually. Going to medical school, doing great. He decided to hike the Appalachian Trail the summer before medical school, got a tick bite, got Lyme, developed Hashimoto's, lost a ton of weight, came to see me, diagnosed as Lyme disease, but he wasn't getting better. Come to find out, the house he grew up in for 18 years had horrible mold in it. It affected his dad, affected his parents. And so we started getting him better once we started detoxifying his mold, got his Lyme better, got his Hashimoto's under control. And so all of a sudden, it's like his story was a toxin story triggered by the tick bite. But UVA, when he was there, UVA was like number one, number two. They were like one of the top soccer programs in the country for college. So he's the lead athlete at a high level with this stuff living in his body. So I think you have to figure out the individual setup for the person, but toxins, chemicals, nutrition are huge parts of it.
Another thing you emphasized was this idea of genetically modified organisms or foods. And that's also something that 20, 30 years ago, I mean, it kind of from the mainstream science, I guess, if you want to say that, there was no evidence to any negative downstream effects. It was completely safe. It was only for benefit. Certainly, there can be benefit to anything that one does, but there were some initial concerns about long-term effects of that, which I think really weren't taken that seriously until recently. What are some of the things that you're seeing that can be downstream effects of genetically modified foods on the body, on the gut, on just overall health?
I mean, one of the biggest things with genetically modified foods is with wheat, for example, and soy. They are genetically modified to withstand large amounts of glyphosate or Roundup. So part of the genetic modification, and the wheat's actually hybridized, it's not genetically modified, but the soy is genetically modified, corn is they're actually made so you can just douse them with tons and tons of Roundup, and they survive, but the weeds die, right? So all of a sudden, GMO food becomes a vehicle for Roundup or glyphosate, which is a herbicide in a petroleum-based distillate, which has a bunch of issues. As far as the genetically modified aspect to it, we're just learning about microRNA. We're just learning about how food contains information. But living food has these microRNA. Protein has these peptides that have information. So part of what food has is information that comes into our body. And if you eat, microRNA from the fresh green plants in your backyard, you get peptides from the cow, or whatever, the chicken, the egg you ate. That information actually tells you outside of your DNA, separate from your DNA, separate from your RNA, speaks to your body how to do certain things based on the information in the food. Well, now we're taking different information. We're taking corn with pig information. We're taking corn with a Bt toxin information. We're taking over-hybridized Triticus triticum, which can't survive in nature. Okay, think about that. The wheat is so hybridized that literally it won't survive in nature. It only grows 18 inches tall. You have to use Roundup now. Otherwise, other plants will overgrow it. What information does that have in our that gets to our bodies, and what does it do? And the answer is we don't know. And so there's a thing called the precautionary principle, and the precautionary principle is you have to prove something safe before you introduce it to the population. They do that in Europe, which is one of the reasons why in many countries these genetically modified foods, including Roundup, are banned. Right here or not, we don't believe in the precautionary principle. Prove it's bad for me. Prove it hurts me. I'm like, okay, let's do an experiment and give it to millions of people and see what happens. Right, and that's what we do here. And the problem is, once you do that, how do you parse out what's causing the harm? So I think of a genetically modified food just from a precautionary principles perspective. Like, one of the newer things in my world is understanding that food is not just macronutrients, proteins, carbohydrates, fats. It's not just micronutrients, calcium, magnesium, whatever. It's also phytonutrients, plant-based nutrients that feed the bacteria in your gut, and it's information. And these last two are literally just coming to the consciousness in the functional medicine research world. And our entire food paradigm, safety paradigm ignores that. And that's concerning because it takes 20, 30, 40 years to find out how much harm something causes. I just like to remind people that in the 50s, doctors told patients smoking was good for their health, right? I smoke, Lucky Strikes or whatever. It'll help, it'll help you look better. It'll help you be, blah, blah, blah. We literally told people this. The AMA literally in the 1970s said, it's controversial. We don't have proof. There's no proof that smoking is bad for us, right? These are what the most respected organizations in our country said about something we all now accept to be bad for our health. And so I think we're just repeating that history, but now at a bigger scale with not just one thing, but in our entire food system. It's a bad experiment that I feel like is playing out right now with all of our increased cancer, heart disease, diabetes, childhood illnesses. There's a reason why we're seeing an increased uptick, all these things. And it's not just, we're better at diagnosing stuff.
Another thing I've heard you speak about, which also is, I think, really come to the forefront now of medicine, is the role of inflammation and kind of the impact that inflammation has in the body, and just the quite detrimental role it can have in so many different illnesses. Is that something you can speak more about?
I mean, we now know inflammation is a underlying cause for disease in general. Aging. We actually now call it inflammaging. So it's inflammation-induced aging. As you age, you can track this, and we have population data on this where you can watch people's SED rates go up, fibrinogen levels go up, ferritin. These are different blood tests for inflammation. But ultimately, inflammation reflects immune system dysregulation. Your body has this really amazing ability. You sprain an ankle. You injure yourself, you get sick. You want to ramp up inflammation, which is part of your immune system, to help heal that sprained ankle, to help heal those bones, to help get that flu out of your body. But once that's gone, once you're healed, once the flu's gone, then you need this anti-inflammatory aspect of your immune system to kick in, to quell down the inflammation, to go back to your baseline. But what happens is when you have inflammatory foods, you have high omega-6 level foods, you have processed foods, you have trans fats in your food system, you have chemicals. You keep an imbalance towards inflammation. Cardiovascular disease. There's 3 parts to cardiovascular disease, and one of those is inflammation in your arteries. It's called endothelial. It's part of it's endothelial dysfunction and immune dysregulation. But inflammation is a big part of that. And these 3 things are what causes heart disease or causes vascular disease. Well, you're no older than your arteries. If your arteries to your brain, your heart, and your kidney, your feet, your liver are old, guess what? You're old, doesn't matter how old you are. And inflammation can cause this. And so inflammation is this elephant in the room that now is common knowledge, even the regular medicine world, even the conventional world, inflammation related with diabetes. If your blood sugars are high, you have more inflammation. Inflammation related with hypertension. If your blood pressure is high, it causes more stress on small arteries. They get more inflamed. A big cause of inflammation in our culture is our macro and micronutrient consumption. We eat too many calories with not enough nutrition. So we put wood on the fire without enough water to put the fire out. And guess what? We create population-wide inflammation. So this concept is not new anymore. It's actually accepted in the traditional medicine world now as well. It's been a tenet of functional medicine from the beginning. But now it's pretty standard in textbooks and in journals. I read it in the standard medical literature. Inflammation is an underlying cause for pretty much every chronic health disease out there.
You spoke about the importance of diet, and I think again that that's something that more and more people obviously really accept. It's I think quite hard to not accept that. Um, there's so many different theories on diet. I mean, everything from vegetarian to veganism to raw food to carnivore to meat. Do you think, I mean, obviously there's a very individual component to it, but do you find there are ways, I mean, you mentioned this more traditional way of eating, something that's more in line with how we ate traditionally, maybe even something more like a Weston price way of looking, or can maybe ketogenic, loosely speaking. But do you find there are ways of eating that you found to be beneficial to yourself or to clients that you work with?
100%. And the problem is everybody's looking for the magical diet. Like what's the diet that's best for me? And my question is, well, how old are you? Because a diet for a 3-year-old is not going to be the same diet for a 30-year-old or a 80-year-old. Where do you live in the world? I mean, your physical environment is going to change your body's nutrient needs. Seasons of the year, when it's cold, you actually need more fats and protein to keep your body warm versus in the middle of summertime, So all of a sudden, like diet is not this one size fits all. And so the concept I tell patients is eat real food, um, mostly plants in moderation, following seasonal availability. It's kind of interesting how when certain things are more available in nature, for example, the spring, microgreens are popping up, fresh green things. Those are things that help your body, your liver speed up and detoxify chemicals and toxins your body may have made during the wintertime. Um, Towards the late fall, you have more nuts, you have more carb full things like in the fall, you're trying to fatten up for the wintertime, right? So it's interesting how nature almost interesting thing as well in the fall, early winter, mushrooms start popping up. Mushrooms are interesting for your immune system, actually help fight off viruses and cancers. So it's interesting how seasonally what nature provides for us, it kind of sort of meets our body's nutrient needs. So I don't say one size fits all. We should all do, paleo, vegan, carnivore, omnivore, whatever the trend is. But you want to eat real food. You want to eat what's available locally, not what's coming halfway around the world, and you want it to be nutrient dense food. And so outside of that, then it's like, do you have a health issue? Do you have an autoimmune issue? Then you can become more refined with it. But I've actually put together a food sourcing guide for patients, with food sourcing guide in the United States that actually kind of addresses these concepts and as well helps people source the food. But that's kind of the way I look at it. If you look at blue zones, what's the proof? Blue zones, these are places where people live to be 100 more than anywhere else in the world. Okinawa, Loma Linda, California, Nicoya, Costa Rica, Okonos in Greece. And in these places, the diets are totally different, unrelated. But what's the same is you're eating real food from the environment, close social context. They have close-knit societal groups, family groups, and they're physically active. And so I think diet's not as complicated as we make it out, but because of marketing and influencers and media, it's made something we've naturally figured out for millennia. It's made a basic thing confusing and complicated for people.
Yeah. You also were speaking about this idea of testing, and I mean, obviously, testing is part of diagnosis. Some people are familiar with you have blood tests, urine tests, fecal tests. I think the field of testing has really advanced in the last decade or two. Can you speak a bit more about what can be tested, how that's used, and how you work with that? Because I think a lot of people aren't familiar now with the kind of some of the advancements in testing.
Well, this is a basic testing that your doctor routinely does, a metabolic panel, a blood count, just looking at your liver, kidney function, electrolyte levels. Then there's the next level, which would be looking for inflammatory markers. That's, your cardiologist might order a HSCRP, which is an inflammatory marker, or sed rate. There's lipid markers that also check for inflammation, a regular lipid panel. Then there's an advanced lipid panel that looks at particle number, size, looks for different inflammatory markers. Fatty acid analysis, you can actually do a blood test that actually looks at your fatty acids, will measure your omega-3, omega-6, omega-9 levels, saturated fat. Are your fats balanced? Then you get to the next level of nutritional testing, which is, what's your vitamin D level? I mean, in America, most people are D deficient. The average American, 40% of Americans, I should say, 40% of Americans are deficient in any one B vitamin, right? If there's 12 of them, that means everybody's going to be deficient in something. So check your levels. And then after those levels, then what I do is I start looking for autoimmune disorders. If autoimmune disorders as a whole are a health issue, you should be looking for autoimmune markers. And so this actually has a term, it's called predictive autoimmunity. I can literally do testing to see what your risk is, Jason, for developing an autoimmune disease in the future. So we'll do autoimmune panels for that. Metabolic markers already mentioned. And then you get into the next level under that, which is actually looking at your gut testing. Now we know that the gut microbiome is as metabolically active as your liver. If I want to know your liver function, I should want to know your microbiome function as well. Is it making enough short-chain fatty acids? Are you digesting your food adequately? Is your pancreatic function good? Do you have overgrowth of certain bacteria that cause inflammation? And we do that level. And then looking at the icing on the cake, looking at hormone levels, cortisol levels, and then sex hormone levels, depending on how old you are. This is like my basic testing, that we do on all of our patients, and then individualizing it from there. Maybe you need some genetic markers done to see your risk for other things like an ApoE4 gene. Maybe you need some additional toxin testing done because you got some weird issues. So we can actually do mold testing, mycotoxin. We can actually test for forever chemicals, PFASs, glyphosate. It's amazing how many people actually pee out glyphosate in their urine. Wouldn't you want to know that? And so there's a whole bunch of different tests we can do. We've got our basic protocol, which is the first stuff I mentioned. And then based on the person's symptoms or how they're doing, we can do further advanced testing as well.
You mentioned a few times mold, and mold as a toxin, as something that can contribute to chronic health. It's obviously it's very interesting. I mean, mold is also something that's very natural. I mean, you find it in cheese, you find it in nature, but obviously what you're speaking about is something that's in a dysbiosis, something that's toxic. Often it can be found in the home and in a work environment. How do you find that usually permeates? So where does it originate from? How does it enter the house? How does it enter the person's terrain? And what are ways that you find are successful in beginning to detoxify someone from that?
Well, there's a lot of confusion about mold. And so I want to break up mold and biotoxins, okay? We've known for hundreds of years, thousands of years, that mold can be toxic. I mean, literally in ancient Jewish, in the Old Testament, if you had mold in a building, a branch in the wall, you would actually cut it out. If it came back, you had to destroy the building. The idea that mold could be an unclean thing is not a new concept at all. In the Middle Ages, we knew that corn could get moldy and give you liver failure. So the idea that mold can be a direct toxin to impact our health is not a new idea. It's an old idea. And that's where some of the urine testing comes into play, because you can actually check for urine exposure, which in our food system, that's largely grain-based with moldy corn and moldy wheat and moldy soy. Guess what? When you eat things that eat those things, what happens? You pee out mycotoxins. So that's a direct toxin effect from mold proper. But that is just one part of this bigger idea of biotoxins, which are environmental toxins that actually can activate your immune system to be inflamed. And so for example, a water damaged building, okay? My house is moldy, but mold represents 18% of the toxins in a water damaged building. You have endotoxins, you have actinomyces, you have particulates, you have glycomannins, you have all these other things in a water damaged building that then cause inflammation and cause biotoxin related illness. So there's a lot of confusion in the world of mold toxins and biotoxins. And a lot of times people mix the two worlds together, but they're separate. And the testing for both is different. If someone has a biotoxin illness, I'm doing cytokines, inflammatory markers, C4As. I'm measuring disconnect between people's brain, the HPA axis being dysfunctional, versus just direct food mold. It's a urine test. So I think there's a confusion between those two worlds, and that's when people come to me and have quote unquote mold issues. The reality is most of people with mycotoxin, mold-related illness, it's actually biotoxin, not mold proper. And if I only look at the mold, I'll miss literally 82% of all this biotoxin things, which can include things like endotoxins from a crawl space, for example. In Virginia, we have tons of crawl spaces. 30% of the air in your house comes from your crawl space. You might not have a spot of mold in your house, but you have biotoxins from an unencapsulated crawl space. So I just want to throw that out there, that this whole mold issue and biotoxin issue, they are wedded together, but people don't understand that, and they overemphasize the visual mold and ignore a lot of the invisible things, which are these biotoxins.
And what do you find to be successful ways of working with someone? I mean, if you are able to diagnose them, or if they're coming to you with symptoms, what do you find certain protocols that are useful for that, ways of working with someone?
100%. Well, the first thing is you want to remove exposure. So if it is a water damaged building, which is the appropriate scientific term, not a moldy building, it's a water damaged building. Maybe it's a crawl space, maybe it's your air handler, maybe you have a leak in your faucet, maybe it's just a humidity issue. You have the humidity in your house is too high. You have to remove the exposure. But that can be a month-long and sometimes a year-long process. So then it's like, well, how do I maximize my body detoxifying what it's been exposed to or being exposed to? And that's where binders, there's certain natural binders, charcoal clay, alginate. In my world, we'd use bile acid binders or bile acid sequestrants, which are medications that actually will bind your bile, which your liver makes, and help you poop it out. So it's actually removing the toxic lipids and oils from your body, and then pouring in healthy fats, healthy phosphatidylcholine, phospholipids, healthy omega-3s, phospholipids. Literally, you're doing an oil change. That's literally what we're doing. We're putting healthy fats in, binding up in your gut, and then helping your body burn them off with things like TUDCA and butyrate, which are, TUDCA is a bile derivative, and butyrate is a short-chain fatty acid your gut naturally makes. So we're actually augmenting your body's natural detoxification abilities. People can start feeling better just by helping their body work better. But ultimately, you have to remove the exposure. And that's where food is difficult because, grains, carbs, processed foods, sugar, all these will feed either yeast and mold in your gut, in your sinuses, inflame you, cause nutrient deficiencies. So you have to minimize exposure, help your body work better, and then change your diet. And that's where I think a lot of people get stuck, is the diet aspect, because they're like, well, I've always had this, or my spouse eats this, or my friends eat this. I'm like, yeah, but you're sick. So those are the ways we deal with people. And it works for 70% of people. This is all we need to do. Then there's the other 30%. You got to dive deeper and use peptides, use VIP, a lot of different things to help people's immune systems stop overreacting to these toxins.
So this next question might be a little controversial, but we're trying to put aside the politics as much as we can. You spoke a lot about the kind of bad state that America as a country, on average, that the health of the people are in. I mean, I think most people are on something like 5 or 6 pharmaceuticals. Chronic conditions have skyrocketed. Different autoimmune conditions. I mean, heart disease, cancer, and a lot of these are worldwide too. They're certainly not simply American problems. But as you said, going into an American grocery store, I mean, there's very little live food that does have things that are very beneficial for the life of the consumer. Some of the policies that are coming out now are really emphasizing trying to take away certain chemicals in foods. I mean, there's, I think now, even a questioning of maybe things in vaccines, the adjuvants, things like that. Do you think things are moving in a good direction? Do you think there is a role of government to try and ameliorate that, or are things left better in the private sector? I mean, just from your own kind of experience, like what is a way to begin to move forward, to begin to solve some of these issues?
I mean, I'm in the middle between these. I think we need parameters, we need bumpers, we need parameters on which to live. And so there is a government place to play, but at the same time, we need free speech. We need to be able to talk about it. So, I mean, during COVID was a great example. If you said anything that questioned COVID or the vaccine, I mean, you were canceled at a drop of a pen. It was just crazy how much speech suppression there was. And so I think the idea of a free debate, let's debate the new change with the food pyramid. Let's talk about why you like it or don't like it. We need to be able to discuss these things in a respectful fashion. But so there's a place for the government. to help minimize exposure. But at the same time, people do we believe people have individual choices? If I choose to smoke, and I get lung cancer, that's kind of on me. If I choose to drink a drink every day and get liver issues, that's kind of on me. Like, we give people certain freedoms to make bad decisions. At the same time, we need to have barriers to protect, vulnerable population people. So I think we need a little bit of both. So are we going the right direction? I think we're discussing it. We're discussing fluoride. Has it been a bad idea to take a neurotoxin and put it in our water supply for the last 70 years without really clear data that it actually helps prevent adult cavities? That's something I think we should discuss. We literally just changed the government told us for 50 years fat's bad. Now we literally, it's good as of 2 weeks ago, right? Like, we need to have these discussions. Who thought? Why was it ever a good idea to take petroleum-based dyes and put them into food to make food pretty for kids? Like, my wife and I were over in Europe this past summer, and I got a bunch of M&Ms when we were in Italy. And they're not that pretty. Their colors are kind of off. You look at the back; it's all natural colors. It's like natural. It's like beet extract for the red. It's like, and you get American M&Ms, and they're beautiful. And it's like all these weird petroleum-based dye things. Like, why is it controversial now that we're saying remove this from the food system when these companies make these products for Europe and Canada that don't have these chemicals in it, right? So I feel like we need to have these conversations and use like common sense is uncommon, right? Eating petroleum-based dyes probably just doesn't make sense. Making ultra-processed foods representing 60 to 8% of what kids eat and just regular processed 80% of what adults eat probably doesn't make sense. So I think we need to have these conversations, but use common sense. Unfortunately, everything's become political these days. And so if someone on the other side says something that's truthful, why can't we just agree with them? Why do we have to disagree because they're on the other side of the spectrum, which is kind of the way things have become. Our food system is not optimal. I mean, you go to Europe and you go around European cities, my people are from England and Germany. You don't see overweight people everywhere. You go to Disney here in America and it's like, oh my gosh, what's going on here? It's like, so there's definitely something going on. When you have the richest country in the world, the most powerful country in the world, having the worst health outcomes and paying more per capita than anywhere else in the world, you have to wonder what's going on. And you look at how medicalized, how many kids taking medications, the mental health, we could talk about this, the mental health crisis in our country, the more and more we've been prescribing medications and quote unquote treating mental health with our kids, the worse and worse it's been getting. Like, what are we doing wrong here? Is there a dietary component? Is there an environmental component? Vaccines, I don't quite understand why it's controversial not to give the Hep B vaccine to a newborn. Like, you get hepatitis B from sex with prostitutes and from IV drug use. Maybe wait till the kid's 8, 9, 10, or 12 or whatever. Like, why do they have to get it when they're newborn? And when I was in the hospital, we used to do that in 2000, and every kid got 101 fever. And if you gave it to them too early and they got that fever, they got a sepsis workup, they got blood draw, they got a spinal tap. And so we eventually stopped, only gave the kids the Hep B vaccine. Like, you go in the hospital, here's your shot. So they had the fever at home. They're fussy, and the mom's doing it. Don't worry about the little fever. Don't worry about it. Like, we've known that for decades. Like, why is it a big deal just to put that off a bit, So it's some of the things we're arguing about. It's almost like we're arguing just for the sake of arguing because, you're a different color than me, Jason. So I have to argue. No matter what you say, I have to argue with you. It's like, if we speak truth, we speak logic, we speak science, we need to be able to have these conversations and do it in a polite way and not demonize people. If we have different thoughts on things, then maybe you need to educate me and I need to think about it a little bit. That's kind of like what a marriage is, right? You have two different people with different thoughts and you got to make it work. And so I feel like we just need to make this work and become more civilized about it. But I think we're in the right direction. We literally have said real food's good. We've literally said processed food's bad. We're moving chemicals and dyes from the food system. And this is being led by a guy who's literally sued Monsanto and won, who sued the federal government and won, who he's cut his teeth and made his expertise in suing big organizations because of them polluting the environment. So I feel like, we're going the right direction. We just need to look at the information, and the ultimate goal is I want my kids to be healthy. Jason, I want your kids to be healthy. I want our kids to get along and live their best lives. And that's what it's about, not, being right in the moment.
Yeah, I think that's very, very beautifully put. One of the things kind of coming back to full circle is we were talking in the beginning about this idea of diagnosis, and obviously there's a physical component, there's a mind component, the mind body connection as we spoke about. I think one of the things that's often not spoken about in a lot of medicine, and obviously, you mentioned this term a number of times, like our worldview, our cosmovision, as people will often describe it. And obviously, we all have very unique worldviews, and that literally shapes how we see the world. But even in a lot of our traditional medicines where we would trace the roots of Western medicine, whether it was from Greek origins or even potentially earlier to Egyptian origins, potentially earlier depending on again our worldview, there did tend to be a spiritual component to that as well. How do you, as a doctor, how do you incorporate that into your life, into your practice? Is there one at all? I mean, what do you think is the importance of that? I mean, even these words like psyche, which psychology or psychiatry. I mean, there's a mind body spirit connection that's built into the Greek word of that, which I think we often have moved away from. But even you were mentioning this idea of this kind of, if we want to call it an epidemic, but certainly a big problem of mental illness amongst young people in the U.S. It does seem that there's a certain, if you want to say, spiritual component to that. So like a deep longing, a sense of not being felt in a certain place. Even you mentioned this idea of the blue zones, and one of, I think, the interesting things you said that was really, it seems to be correlated. Even though the diets are not so similar, but there's a natural component to them. Is this idea of some sense of community, some sense of purpose, some sense of a feeling of a part of being something bigger. So, kind of a long-winded question, but what do you think is that role of spirit, however someone wants to look at that in
Yeah.
terms of someone's health and well-being?
It's a big component. I mean, if just the idea that if you have a purpose and meaning in life, there's something for you to live for, that determines whether you survive a Nazi concentration camp. Like that is Viktor Frankl. That was the guy who wrote Man's Search for Meaning. Like that's crazy to think that just having a sense of purpose and meaning, there's something to live for. I personally, I believe in purpose in my life. I believe there's a purpose for me being here. I believe in a higher power. I believe in God. 80% of the population in America, most people in the world believe in some higher purpose, some higher being. That's not really controversial. It's like, what does that mean for you, like for your health? And the ultimate thing is like, how does that impact the way you live your life? If you believe in there's something, a higher purpose or meaning, love others like you love yourself, then all of a sudden now I'm going to live a life in a fashion. We adopted our kids, all three of our kids. Why do we adopt our children? Because part of my belief system is to care for the widow, orphan, and stranger. So that's, the fatherless, the spouseless, and the countryless. And so when I had an opportunity to adopt basically an orphan, I said yes, because I believe these things. And so if you have this mindset, it's going to change the way you live your life. It's going to change your interact with people that are struggling in this world. Like if you see someone from different country of origin, different ethnicity, gender, whatnot, you're going to look at them with compassion because they are a person of value, meaning as much as you are, and they have a spark of the divine in them. And so if that's your underlying worldview and purpose, when you see people that are suffering, people that are sick, the reason why I work so hard with my daughter and with patients is I believe ultimately that illness and sickness is not the way things are supposed to be. And so it's my way of letting this higher power work through me to help people by do what it's made to do, which is self-heal and self-repair. Just that belief system alone in my life has affected thousands of patients' lives. It's changed my life. All my kids have their own health journey. My oldest daughter is the most extreme. My second daughter, almost as extreme. My son, a little bit less, and they are all thriving. I've had patients, not by my practice. So I think you're tapping into the idea that there's a purpose for us, there's a plan for us. Find out what it is for you, and that might just be to be a good parent, to be a good spouse, to help out your neighbor. It doesn't have to be anything grand. It just has to be doing what you're supposed to do, what you're made or designed to do. And if you don't have that purpose, it can be a difference between survival or not. A great example I have. Well, if you want to read an interesting book, there's actually a book, Radical Remission, and it talks about cancer diagnosis and people diagnosed with cancer. And sometimes they spontaneously remit. There's about 1,000 cases of this in the medical literature being reported. And one of the top 9 things the book talks about is this sense of purpose and meaning, value, this connection with the higher power in people's actually ability to survive cancer, like something as hard and concrete and real as cancer. And so all of a sudden now it's like there's a place for this to be discussed, but our healthcare system, our scientifically minded, reductionistic mindset, I mean, you can't, like the mind, we talk about what's the mind, right? We can't even explain that. The idea of the infinite, how do we talk about that in scientific terms? I like a lot of physics. I read and listen to different experts in astrophysics and dark matter and stuff. When you hear these people talk about really high level scientific stuff, it has a very spiritual sound to it. Like most of the universe is dark matter. You can't see it. We can't measure it. We see its effects. I'm like, that sounds kind of spiritual. But what's that mean? It means that the reason I do what I do, the reason why I do with patients what I do is because I believe they are made for a higher purpose and meaning, that they're people of worth and value. And whether others believe that or not, you want me to treat you as if you have meaning and value and your body can heal and self-repair. And we all want that dignity, whether our overlying worldview has a belief in God. But it's interesting how just believing that means you never give up on yourself. You never give up on others. You won't quit when there's it literally looks like there's nothing ahead of you. You've been told your daughter would never walk, talk, or crawl. She has stroke. Her corpus callosum didn't form, and she's going to slobber on herself the rest of life. Do I accept that prognosis? I did not. Why? Because I knew something was there. I knew that she had a purpose for her life. I mean, she's a joy to be around. People love my daughter. She's magnetic. I mean, she attracts people to her, which is really kind of cool to see that. And so this mindset, this belief can have a massive impact, not just on your health, but like what you do in this world, like what you do with your family. What's your legacy? What do you leave behind you when you die and you have your kids? What do they leave behind? So it's a big idea that unfortunately, because it's so big and grand, it's outside of the purview of science to talk about because science doesn't have the tools or the way to even discuss it in a logical fashion.
Yeah, I think that's a beautiful way to put it. What you said something in the beginning, which I think is always the sign of a good doctor, which is this idea that healing it's infinite. It's as large as the universe. It's a never-ending path. We never get there. There's always something to learn. What is there anything on your horizon? Anything that's really interesting you personally right now? Any fields or techniques or just anything that you find your focus moving towards?
Yeah, in the last couple of months, I've stumbled across neural therapy, which was actually, the phrase was coined in 1925 in Germany. And I know of no one in the United States practicing it right now. It's a really kind of intriguing thing using basically a procaine, which is a anesthetic to reset your nervous system. I'm also studying right now bioresonance therapy, which is actually used in Hungary. They use it in Hungarian rehab facilities, and it measures your body's basic galvanic response, measures your body's almost like a lie detector, measures your skin and tell what your nervous system is doing, and then puts back into your body a low energy pulse electromagnetic field to kind of re-regulate your body's nervous system. That's something I'm actually studying, and I have a device at home that I'm using with my kids. And then lipid therapy, I'm doing IV phosphatidylcholine in my office right now with patients just to help clean them out. And so cell membranes, I'm having some really good results with patients. So the good news about what I do is I'm always learning new things and instituting new things, but those are kind of what I'm doing right now. And who knows what I'll be doing a year from now.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. If people are interested to work with you, do you work with individual clients? Can people work with you in person, remotely? How does that look?
Yeah. Currently, my practice is closed. I do have a personalized precision medicine practice, and that's usually by word of mouth kind of stuff with people to work with me like I worked with my daughter. In my practice, we have 3 other practitioners in my practice, and that practice is open. We're continually taking new patients, and then when I find practitioners who are of a like mindset who want to practice in the Richmond area, this kind of medicine we practice, we bring them on board and they join our practice. And so we've been every year or two been having a new practitioner join us, which has been exciting. There's too much of a need. There's like a need that can't be met just with us, which is exciting. So we're trying to create more educational opportunities as well, and with our website and blogs and podcasts and my book and a bunch of things just to educate people as well. So doing lots of ways to get a hold of me and learn from me, or even see me or the practitioners in our practice as well.
And if someone is interested in doing that, what's the best way? Your website?
Well, I may start with the Aaron Hartman MD, which is get you to me. It's like a website about me, and then that leads to my practice, which is Richmond Integrative and Functional Medicine. That also goes to my podcast, social media, as well as to my book Uncurable, which is about my daughter. So probably just go in Aaron Hartman MD for starters, and then from there you can go to all the other avenues after that.
Well, wonderful. Well, thank you so much. This was a pleasure. I really enjoyed how you speak, what you're speaking about. I think you're doing really good work. I think you have a beautiful outlook and just a very holistic approach and that kind of lifelong curiosity and actually being able to put it into practice with what you've done with your children, your clients. I think it's a beautiful thing. So I really commend you for your work. And I just really, really wish you all the best.
Oh, thanks a lot.
All right, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that conversation. I really enjoyed speaking with Dr. Hartman. Again, I think he's doing really good work, really holistic, just well-versed way of looking at medicine. And I think he commands a lot of respect. I hope this finds you all well. Thank you all so much, as always, for tuning in. As always, if you're able to support this podcast, that's a really big help. Patreon is a beautiful way of giving back. There's different tiers you can sign up for. Those tiers also give you different things back, things like early access to shows, bonus material, Q&As. As always, thank you so much to the people supporting that way. It really means a lot. And if you're able to do that, thank you so much. If you're not, always helping with the algorithms is a very big help. So if you're viewing this on YouTube, hitting the subscribe button, turning on the notification bell, liking the video, and if you're listening to this on Apple Podcast or Spotify, leaving a starred rating and a short review. And then finally, a reminder, if you're interested in working with myself, you can check out my website, Nutritional Rustica. If you're interested in working individually with myself and my colleague Marav Artsy through our plant medicine dietas, our schedule is up there, my calendar is up there. So feel free to check that out. There'll be a link to that in the show notes. So I think that's it. Thank you all again for tuning in. Again, I hope this finds you all well, and I will see you all on the next episode.
Doom.